Good morning. Welcome to At Your Peak. Ryan Kibbe talking fundamentals and part 2 of barrier busters and how we, in faith in Christ, we live out a life empowered to bust the barriers, the labels, the lids, the limitations, the things that stop us from moving in great love and in great faith and in great power. There's a story in Matthew 15 that I want to read to you that adds another layer of some of the barriers that we need to bust. I did part 1 yesterday. Feel free to go back and review. This kind of drives that thought about breaking labels, lids, and limitations. And in yesterday's session, we talked about being under authority and how faith and authority work together. Your faith will grow as you learn God's economy and how He values authority given and delegated and authority used properly, and how faith ties in to authority. So for more on that teaching, go back to Barrier Busters Part 1. Today in Matthew 15, a great story that helps drive another aspect that we're talking about. It says, Jesus went away from there and withdrew into the region of Tyre and Sidon. And a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed." He didn't answer her with a word. Now think about that. Offense number 1. And his disciples came up and urged him, saying, "Hey, send her away. She is just shouting at us constantly." And then he answers and said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she kept coming and began to bow down before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And yet he answered and said, this is Jesus, mind you, God of the universe, says to this woman, "You know, it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Another offense. And she says, in response, "Yes, Lord," as she breaks through her own offense, "Yes, Lord, please help. For even the dogs feed on the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed at once. 3 things the Syrophoenician woman, this woman who was outside of God's covenant, she was not considered one of God's chosen people at that time. Now we know that Jesus came to die for all and to reconcile all of humanity. But at that time, when Jesus said, "Hey, I'm not giving to you what is for the children of Israel." His first ministry in the earth when he came 2,000 years ago was to the children of Israel, the Hebrew people, not the Syrophoenician woman. So at that moment, as he's bringing and building a bridge in his ministry, she's not aware that he's eventually going to die for all. There's this point where she's crossing a threshold, pulling something out of season into season, and she doesn't even know it. Later on, Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross would be the children's bread for everybody. But at that moment, it wasn't. And she pulls something that was reserved for another day into her day by faith and by busting through barriers. Here's what she overcame. She overcame being ignored. Many of us at times have made petitions for the Lord and we're like, "Where's heaven?" And you just crickets. She had to work through offense, both with people and even with God. And she had to deal with feeling excluded and even less than. Can you imagine? And yet she kept coming. Persevering faith was the result. And this Syrophoenician woman, in response, did everything right. She's told no, and it's not my will, and she got her answer anyway. Think about that for a second. She got heaven's attention by busting through her personal barriers and lids for the desperation for her family to get a breakthrough, and she got her answer. Then she comes and worships at the feet at the no. Think about that. Let's say you're in church service and you're praying and God's never answering, and your response at the no is to worship Him. Wow. Not to pout. Not to say, "Why, God, why?" Her response in the midst of a no was worship. She didn't put God on a performance contract. The result was her persistence and curiosity unlocked something from heaven that was in the Father's heart to bring into present what was reserved for another day. And when she came to Jesus, she did not disqualify herself, even though the law at that time, the prevailing thought at that time was to disqualify herself. She believed in Jesus' qualification to do something marvelous. So she made the focus him, not her inadequacy. She didn't presume on her worthiness, she pulled on his. And delay, as we learned, isn't always denial. Had she moved into complain mode, that would have been worshiping the devil, because that's what worship is. It's complaining is music to the devil's ears. Here's an action step for you this week. God is looking for people to stand in the gap who are willing to and intercede for people like this woman did. To put a demand on some area of your life that he summons you, a burden for breakthrough, and be willing to put faith on display and into action if he summons you. This is an important thing in interceding for others. She wasn't looking for something for herself. She was looking for others to step into a level of breakthrough. And she opened a door there, a window into the new covenant that was not previously known that way to his disciples. Jesus used her barriers to show how they can be busted through as a model for you and I. What are the labels, lids, limitations, and breakthroughs that you could bring heaven to earth on in your job and in your home? Persistent faith brings answers, and it brings great results. Love you, and we'll see you tomorrow.